Welcome to this session called From Liquid to Digital Ink. With me today is Niko, a forensic document examiner from Greece. He also moonlights as a researcher at Staffordshire University in the UK, and he has a background in theoretical physics and forensic sciences. Welcome, Niko.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Can you tell us what your session is about?
Well, I will be discussing about the significance of signatures and how they transition from traditional liquid ink format to the digital world.
Yeah, but in this digital age, are signatures actually still relevant or are they obsolete?
I mean, the goal is authentication, and signatures are so familiar to both the signatories and the system or controller of signatures that they still remain up to date. For example, if you look at the US elections recently in the news everywhere, and the mail-in ballots and how important those were in the process, it's the signatures in the core of that process that guarantee authentication, as we will be discussing about in the beginning of the lecture.
Great. So let's dive into the lecture and learn more about that.
Now, let's discuss a little bit about the signature and its history as a means of authentication for humans. Signatures are the easiest biometric authentication features that we can execute by choice. The oldest autograph, meaning the oldest writing that was used to identify one person, has been located in Sumeria some 5,000 years ago. And the signature has been used ever since throughout human activity and culture. But it wasn't until 1677 and the Statute of Frauds Act of the English Parliament that the signature was recognized as an essential part for contracts in order for them to be legally binding. Such contracts in the Statute of Frauds Act included marriage consideration, carrying tasks that would take more than 1 year, transfer of land, debts, sales of goods, and so on. But why use the signature and not use to other means of authentication that were available since the Middle Ages, like wax seals and so on? Well, the answer is that with any other authentication means, even with the finger mark, consent cannot be guaranteed. It is only with the execution of the signature that we can guarantee consent of the author. And now it's time for some clarifications. When we refer to a liquid ink signature or a pen and paper signature or a traditional signature, we mean the signature we all normally execute on a daily basis using a writing instrument on a substrate. eSignature is the new type of signature that captures handwriting movements with the proper digitizing equipment, which we will be defining in detail later on. And finally, a word of caution: what we discussed today has nothing to do with digital signatures, which are a completely different thing and do not involve the capturing of any kind of handwriting pattern. So we've seen that signatures for the last 5,000 years are very important and are used as a means of authentication. But the question is whether it is a good means of authentication, meaning, is there a scientific methodology in order to determine authorship and genuineness? In order to address that, we need to examine two separate questions. The first one is whether signatures are truly unique to their author. This has been extensively researched, and it has been determined that the execution of handwriting is a complex neuromuscular task that involves both the brain and the neuromuscular network to function. and therefore is highly complex and unique to the owner of the signature, and it cannot be completely replicated by any other person. So the second question that we need to discuss is whether that authenticity can be determined on a scientific level. Now, as a result of the Daubert ruling back in 1990s, a lot of research was executed and carried by the late Dr. Brian Found and Doug Rogers from La Trobe University. And it was established that properly trained forensic handwriting examiners can determine authenticity within the bounds of science. So the next logical question is, how do we do it? And of course, just like any other forensic science discipline, we apply pattern analysis. And through the ages, we have identified the different characteristics of handwriting that change when we move from an authentic signature to a forged signature. But it wasn't until 1999 that Huber and Hedrick categorized all possible changes into groups. And this is the table that presents all those different characteristics that we can examine. And as you can see, there are quite many of them. But enough of the theory. Let's test our ability as forensic handwriting experts. On the left, we have a genuine signature, and on the right, we have a disputed signature. Can you determine whether the signature on the right is authentic or if it is a forgery? Looking at the shapes, we can see that there are a lot of similarities, pictorially speaking, between the two signatures. There's a slight difference at the bottom part of the disputed signature, but that can be explained by the natural variation of the genuine signatures of the author, especially if we had access to more genuine material. And therefore, this signature is a genuine signature. What about this signature? Over here, we can see that the bottom part is more similar to the one of the specimen signature, but we have big differences in the middle and upper part of the signature, plus the quality of the line of the signature is quite bad in the disputed signature, and therefore this signature is a forgery. Finally, what about this pair of signatures? It would be ridiculous to proceed to any type of comparison as they are so strikingly different. Still, the signature on the right was executed by the author of the specimen signature when asked to produce a signature with intent to deny it after the fact. So this is another category of signatures that we call disguised signatures. So we see that signature examination, it's not so trivial after all. So how do forgers forge? In this example, the signature on the top is a genuine signature. The signatures on the bottom are two forgeries of completely different types. The first signature is a more accurate simulation of the form of the specimen signature, but in order to accomplish that, the forger executed the forgery with less natural movements. And if we look at the dynamic data of the signature execution, we can see how slow the execution is. It takes almost 4 times the length of the original signature. So that's one extremity. The other extremity is to try and execute a more natural movement, a more natural execution of the forgery, but exactly because it is not the forger's real signature, the shape will be sacrificed. So with this extremity, we have a more natural execution, but a more inaccurate representation and simulation of the pictorial characteristics. Every forgery falls somewhere between these two extremities. And we can look further into how forgers forge using this video created by the late Dr. Brian Found, applying eye tracking technology. Here we have a specimen signature on the top, and a forger is asked to replicate that signature. And the point where the forger's eye focus is represented with a blue dot on the image. And we can follow the eyes of the forger. We can see how the gaze of the forger is advancing almost one character in front of the one that is being executed. We can see how the forger will revisit parts of the signature and will retouch his product, adding or correcting features that he's not satisfied with. But enough about the traditional signatures. Let's have a look at the e-signatures, also known as digitally captured signatures, also known as biometric signatures. So what is an e-signature? We walk into a bank and we execute this signature formation using a plastic-tipped stylus on a digitizer when we want to authenticate a money transaction. When we do that, a PDF file that has the image of our signature is being created. Is that the representation the e-signature? Or could it be merely the snapshots of the stylus tip position? Or maybe is it the movie that can be created through this process? The answer is that none of these things constitute the e-signature. When we execute this formation with the proper hardware equipment, what takes place is a recording of data. And specifically, we have 4 channels of information, and the spatial coordinates X and Y, the exercised force and the time are the information that is being captured. And that information is being coded in numerical form. That numerical form is the e-signature. And as we said, the bare minimum of information that needs to be captured is the X and Y axis position, the time, and the force that has been applied on the Z axis. Now, depending on the technology used, we can have additional information recorded and captured. Like, for example, if we have EMR technology equipment, we can have information regarding whether there was contact of the stylus to the digitizer surface, or we can have another class of characteristics that are being calculated from the captured ones. Since we capture spatial coordinates and time, we can calculate the distance traveled, the speed, the acceleration, and so on. So for the forensic handwriting expert, but also the legal professional, the question that is very, very important is whether e-signatures are equivalent to pen and paper signatures. In order to answer that, at least from a forensic point of view, we need to look at the characteristics identified by NFX's best practice manual for examining traditional pen and paper signatures. The e-signature data will allow us to calculate the position of the stylus, and providing us with snapshot of the stylus position per time increment, we can recreate different types of representation. And with these different types of representation, we can have a direct and intuitive approach to all the characteristics of the signature formation, as if it was executed with a pen on a paper. Looking at the selected characteristics from the NFX best practice manual, We can approach them in three groups. The first group consists of size, proportions, spacing, slant and slope, and individual character proportions. All these characteristics are specially measurable, and therefore we can straightforwardly and accurately measure them and calculate them from the recorded biometric data X and Y. And not only that, the currently available eSignature technology will allow us faster and more accurate calculations of these features. So with eSignatures, we can compare these features far better than before. The second group includes style and form, individual character construction, individual character shape, character combinations and connections, and individual parts of the signature. Again, these are specially measurable features, but with technology like the one we use for e-signatures and taking advantage of the time information that we have access to for the first time, plus the selection capabilities of the numerical nature of the biometric data, we can isolate parts, informations of the signature. We can create movies, so we can see the natural sequence of execution and therefore analyze them faster and far better than before. Finally, and most revolutionary, we have the dynamic characteristics. These consist of writing speed, fluency, pressure, and strokes. These characteristics traditionally have been qualitatively approached, with the expert examining the signature under a stereo microscope and trying to determine the pressure that was exercised by examining the three-dimensional groove of the ink line. But with eSignature technology, we finally have a quantitative representation of the exercised force for the first time. Plus, we can accurately and directly measure the speed of writing. So for the dynamic characteristics group, eSignature technology not only covers the bases specified by the NFEX best practice manual, it gives us far more insight to these dynamic aspects of writing. Let's look at a quick example of eSignature practicality. Let's assume for this scenario that we are tasked with the preliminary control of authenticity of two signatures. We have the signature on the top, which is the specimen signature, and the signature on the bottom, which is a crude forgery. I know it might look obvious that the signature on the bottom is a forgery, but consider how much easier and how much more confident your conclusion would be if you had access to the dynamic information with respect of the exercised force. Here we can see how different force has been applied and the different of the pressure profile. And if that gives you more confidence than before, consider having access to the temporal information as well. And we carefully selected this example of forgery because the time of execution of the forgery is very close to the time of execution of the original signature. It's 4.5 seconds versus 4 seconds. Still, the rhythm of execution is completely different. So what's the current state of affairs for e-signatures from the forensic point of view? As we already discussed, we have at our disposal several new different representations of the same signature execution movements. This allows the expert not only to examine and determine the authenticity of questionee signatures, but also to include e-signature technology in their routine pen and paper casework. For example, consider an expert has to analyze the signature in order to examine a question pen and paper signature. The expert can analyze this signature, spending a lot of time with the signature under the microscope. But consider how much easier and faster the determination of the sequence of stroke, if nothing else, can be done when having access to e-signature technology. And there is e-signature technology available that will guarantee us that the person providing us with sample executes the exact same motions as if they were signing with a pen on a paper. Specifically, the Wacom clipboard allows us to simultaneously capture e-signature information when the person is executing a traditional pen and paper signature using an inking EMR active pen on a specific type of paper form on the clipboard, and therefore guaranteeing that the conditions of signature execution are exactly the same as if it was a pen and paper sample. So where are we at? We are at the point where we are trying to establish a common analysis methodology. Within the second semester of 2020, the next version of the best practice manual for the forensic examination of handwriting will be released by MC and NFEX. And within that new version, there is an appendix regarding the determination of authenticity of e-signatures, depicting a clear methodology and flowchart of how to accomplish that. Still, there's a long way to go, because all solutions are not the same. And as we mentioned earlier, all solutions will capture the same basic channels of information, X, Y, time, and force. Still, the way that these types of information are represented in their numerical form is not the same. And not only that, the association of pressure levels to exercised force is different from hardware to hardware. For example, these two signatures were executed by the same person, one after the other, and were captured with different equipment. And we can see that the pressure levels described by a different color in these two representations are different. If an expert is asked to render an opinion regarding authenticity of one signature versus the other, if they are not aware of this feature, they will misinterpret the different pressure profile as an indication of forgery, and therefore reach an erroneous conclusion. But we do address this issue. Part of my PhD research with Staffordshire University involves the calibration of different equipment, leading to a calculation of this pressure force correlation function, the so-called zeta function, and using the zeta function in order to achieve normalization and therefore guarantee and provide the ability to experts to compare e-signatures captured with different equipment. I will not go deeper to the technicalities of this solution, but I will show this example because I think it's quite striking. Again, we have these two signatures executed by the same person. The signature on the top was captured with the Wacom STU530 digitizer. The signature on the bottom was captured with an Apple iPad Pro and Apple Pencil. So through our methodology, reversing the zeta function for the iPad Pro, calculating the originally exercised force in Newton, and then recalculating the pressure levels that would have been assigned to that force if it was executed on the STU530, we can normalize the signature that was captured with the iPad Pro and represent it with the pressure levels as they would have been assigned by the STU530. And you can see and follow that the pressure profile in the normalized version of the bottom signature are the same as those with the sample signature. So what's the conclusion of this lecture today? We love e-signatures. We really do. They make our lives easier, and we can examine and determine authenticity of this new medium. There are a lot of things to be done, but there's a huge project that has been achieved within the last 2 years, and the goal is to achieve e-signature to pen and paper signature equivalents legally, methodologically, and practically. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, thank you so much for this very comprehensive presentation, Niko. I learned a lot. So let's see whether we have any questions. Oh yeah. So hi, Niko. Really insightful. What made you interested in this field? And can you share any big fraudulent cases with us?
Well, the combination of pure scientific principles and the application of practical knowledge in forensic science was too pulchritudinous for me to pass by, so I guess it won me over. Now, as for big fraudulent cases, it would take too long to describe any of them, but I can say that we have had a lot of cases where the solution of the case was hidden either in a different question or in a different document altogether from the original mandate. So you should never allow yourself to be biased by the initial, let's say, profile of a case.
Interesting. So another question is, where do you see the future of e-signatures in 5 years from now, maybe? So how do you think technology and cybersecurity will affect this?
People in the beginning always tend to have a petulant approach to new technologies or changes in their accustomed patterns of behavior, right? But I believe that e-signatures will be increasingly cromulent, accepted, and incorporated in everyday life. And in 5 years, we'll treat them just like another version of the traditional signature. We will treat the framework for e-signatures with a copacetic form of taking advantage of available technology in no time. People will be familiar with executing them. Companies and government entities will have incorporated them into the fabric of their infrastructure. And I believe, just like smartphones, in 10 years' time, we will not be able to remember how it was without them. I mean, you'll probably have people even in Mulgai in Scotland routinely using e-signatures in their day-to-day businesses. And if you look at the previous presentation with MedLife in India, CLIPBOARD to facilitate the daily business, there are so many applications for this technology that will seamlessly lead us to the future.
Thank you for that answer. So one more, I think we have time for one more question because I think we should close at 5 p.m. sharp. So again, what's the difference between e-signatures and digital signatures? And there's another one. Oh, so, okay, what's the difference between e-signatures and digital signatures? Niko.
Well, as we discussed, e-signatures are composed of the data created by the capturing of the handwriting movement of the style of a signature information, whilst digital signature is a mathematical scheme for verifying the authenticity of digital messages or documents and does not include any biometric data. And as such, the digital signature media is subject to decoupling from the rightful owner, as Ignacio Domingo mentioned in one of the presentations earlier.
Thank you. So, well, we have actually time for one more maybe. So do you think there will be, oops. No, we don't have time for one more, unfortunately, because obviously the connection broke down, but you know, we're just in time. So why don't we just close this session and well, get on with Connected Ink. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.